Hey everyone, my name is Dillon Gonzalez. I'm the editorial director for GeekVibesNation.com and also a co-host of the Home Dance Film Festival podcast. And I am thrilled to be here with you once again to discuss one of my absolute favorite labels, the Warner Archive. Now, my past few videos on the Warner Archive, I've mostly been sticking to their newer releases, their new monthly releases. And while I'll still be discussing those mostly on the normal Video Attic episodes that I co-host with my colleague Michael Vaughn, so be sure to tune into that, I'm wanting to do something a little bit differently, and I want to start exploring the Warner Archive more fully, because they've been around for several years, and not everyone knows every release that they put out. And while I won't be tackling every release, I want to bring forth some of the gems that you may have overlooked and just give them another chance to be in the spotlight. Because there have been so many releases that I would just put like top tier of Blu-ray releases that I think we just need to another turn at them. But before I really start digging into that, I will just kind of ease us in with a new release, despite what I said. This is a brand new title from the Warner Archive. This is The Last Time I Saw Paris, which is based on a F. Scott Fitzgerald story. You can kind of see the artwork here. So yes, it stars Elizabeth Taylor and Van Johnson, Walter Pidgeon, and Donna Reed, my dear Donna Reed from It's a Wonderful Life. But this is a tragic romance about an American serviceman. He's also a writer who finds unexpected love in Paris, like kind of near the end of the war. And while he initially seems like he's going to be with the woman played by Donna Reed, it's actually her sister that he ends up with in kind of like a torrid romance. And what I find very interesting about this film is there's kind of like a conflict between this man who's kind of like a lowly soldier who just kind of is like he's a struggling writer trying to get his life off the ground. He is kind of marrying into this family that the dad, played by Walter Pidgeon, he's kind of known as a member of the lost generation. He came home from the war and didn't really know what to do with his life, but he kind of like just lived like a high-flying life, and he's kind of made his daughters kind of accustomed to kind of like a life of luxury. So this kind of creates a conflict for quite a while, and within this kind of goes over a number of years, but what this kind of boils down to is the diverging paths between these two lovers played by Van Johnson and Elizabeth Taylor. Like, while they kind of switch roles through as the movie evolves, where Elizabeth Taylor starts to become more of the responsible one, where Van Johnson kind of like gives in to some of his worst tendencies and insecurities and kind of goes down a path of booze and like infidelity. It's very tragic, but it's also very poignant and very well acted. Elizabeth Taylor does a very good job as both the party girl at the beginning and the kind of like heartbroken, mature one near the end. And I won't spoil any of these movies, but it is kind of a heartbreaker, but it's a really well acted, well directed heartbreaker. And I am glad that the Warner Archive rescued this one, because this is, while it's a tough watch in some respects, it's a very compelling watch, and the new Blu-ray is fantastic. It is from a 4K scan of the original Technicolor negatives, and it looks fantastic. The sound has also been restored to pristine quality, and this also has a couple special features, including a Tom and Jerry short, which is very entertaining in HD. I know we're not really getting new Tom and Jerry full releases, but I feel this is kind of Warner Archive's stealth way of kind of doling out their Tom and Jerry cartoons still to audiences, so that's just an added bonus. So The Last Time I Saw Paris is a good one, and I want to bring special attention to Ava Gabor from Green Acres, because that kind of leads into our next title, and there's also some other similarities that I'll point out. Is the classic title, It Started With a Kiss, because I needed something a little lighter to get us off that kind of tragic romance. This is more of a romantic comedy with Glenn Ford and Debbie Reynolds, and you can see the artwork here. So This is kind of along the same lines where there's a soldier who gets like in a sudden whirlwind romance with a coat check girl played by Debbie Reynolds, who also has kind of a personality that's kind of wanting for like a life of luxury, whereas the Glenn Ford character, the soldier, he is kind of more just like a military grunt. I believe he might be a sergeant, but he's not someone who can really afford like a lavish lifestyle for his new woman, eventually turned bride. It's what I find really fun about this is it's a relationship based pretty strictly on chemistry at first. It's while they do like kind of have like a rapport with one another, it is once they kind of get more physical. It started with a kiss. It was where they kind of get into that whirlwind and get married and stuff very quickly, and then they kind of start to wonder, is there anything more to the relationship? And so whenever the Glenn Ford character has to go back to his base in Madrid, she follows him and as his new wife, and kind of institutes a policy where they will not be physical for 30 days to kind of see if they still like one another without the kind of the physicality to drive things forward. And so one of the irritating, but I guess overall supposed to be amusing things is just Glenn Ford's incessant kind of pawing at Debbie Reynolds, which she's a gorgeous woman, I understand, but still, it's kind of not the best to kind of propagate that kind of behavior in the modern light, but at this time it was pretty amusing, and I do overall like the chemistry of these two. It is kind of the plot's kind of furthered whenever the main character, he wins a raffle for an expensive car, which kind of sets in motion this whole chain of events where he has this very expensive custom-made car that kind of makes him like almost like an instant celebrity that kind of gives him the illusion of a life of luxury, which kind of Debbie Reynolds kind of feeds on, and just them figuring out if she would be happy if they didn't have that, and just like what kind of life he can provide her. And as I mentioned in the last one, Ava Gabor, she showed up as a woman that kind of served as like a potential source of familiarity outside of the marriage. She does kind of the same in this role. She shows up, I don't think she's on the cover, but in the back. She once again shows up in that kind of role where she's not really tempting him away, but she kind of makes herself known that she is very interested in him. So it was very kind of similar plots executed differently, with Ava Gabor as kind of like a guiding principle between these. It was a nice bit of happenstance. So while there are issues I have with this one, I think overall it is a nice kind of light romantic comedy. And if you love Debbie Reynolds or Glenn Ford, I think you'll have a good time with this. It's a pretty breezy watch. It's an hour and 44 minutes, but it doesn't really waste much of that time. It kind of every minute pretty much counts. Has a good score, great cinematography, and this Blu-ray looks really nice. It comes from a 2K scan of the inner positive, and while this doesn't have any special shorts or anything, it does include a restored version of the trailer, which is it's at least something in terms of special features. So yeah, It Started with a Kiss is a good romantic comedy if you are a fan of that or a fan of the performers. Moving on to my next kind of hidden gem. This is kind of on two fronts why I picked this. This is the remake of Cimarron from the 60s, which also stars Glenn Ford, so I'm following that tangent. Is also a remake of a film that is being released by the Warner Archive this month. It's the original 30s version of Cimarron, which won the Best Picture at the Oscars. So this is the remake, which Warner Archive put out a few years ago. So I chose to view them in the release order that Warner Archive gave us. So now I'm going to go back in like a future episode on the Video Addict and see the original 30 version and be able to compare. But as this stands, this is an interesting epic. This is based on the Edna Ferber novel of the same name. She is a writer of very grandiose epics, including Giant with James Dean. But this one, it has a very interesting structure. This one starts out very exciting, and then kind of like gradually turns more into like a sprawling melodrama. And the kind of genesis of this story is like the Oklahoma land rush, which I recently saw in a different movie. A few months ago, I caught up with the Tom Cruise Nicole Kidman movie, Far and Away. So it was interesting to kind of see this depicted in a different way. But this is kind of like also a story of a new romance, and like Glenn Ford and his new bride trying to settle in the American West, and kind of all the complications that come with that. Whenever our main character, he can be a little bit obtuse sometimes, but then he's also progressive in his thoughts about Native Americans and how they are treated, and wanting to treat them fairly. So while you're irritated with the character a lot of times, you are also kind of sympathetic to some of his ideas and kind of progressive attitudes. And once again, this leans more towards the tragic side of the spectrum, as like he tries to settle in this town as a newspaper man, and like trying to balance the love for his family with his drive for a career. Whenever things don't always work out, he's always trying to think of schemes to try to get himself and his family like more to a larger station in life. So a lot of these tales so far are dealing with kind of like ideas of wealth, and how kind of coalesces with romance and what is important in life. So it's an interesting theme that a lot of these Warner Archive movies are particularly giving me this week, or this time out. But a lot of people really dislike this movie. It's not my favorite of this group by far, but mainly because it's 2.5 hours long, so it's quite an epic. But it's overall very interesting, and Glenn Ford puts in a very good performance. I just think that it needed to be paced a little bit better, where it has such a exciting beginning with the Oklahoma land rush. It kind of starts to peter out near the end, and then eventually you're getting to certain characters that didn't really start off as like the focal point at all points, and then the way it's, like I said, not spoiling anything, but just the way it evolves, it makes sense within this kind of context of like an epic that's told over several decades. But it kind of, maybe it needed to be kind of tightened up a little bit more to make it a little bit more interesting. But overall, it is a very good movie. And whenever you have, I believe it's Anthony Mann directing this, yes, the great Anthony Mann. His direction is flawless, and all the performances are great. It's a beautiful cinematography. Everything is kind of firing on all cylinders. It's just that script, it just kind of leaves you just wanting a little bit more, or just kind of things to kind of be kind of contained just slightly more. But overall, I do like it, and I look forward to seeing how the 30s version compares to it, because I know people also think that the 30s version, the Best Picture winner, is one of the worst Best Picture winners. So I have my expectations in check, to say the least. Keeping in the American West, I decided I wanted to check out this movie because I've been on a Randolph Scott kick recently. I reviewed the Random Westerns 4K set from the Criterion Collection. So it got me in a Randolph Scott mood. So I decided to check out Ride the High Country with Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea. This is from the great Sam Peckinpah. And this isn't Peckinpah at his most brutal, I've reviewed Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia from Kino Classics before. And a lot of his later work is a lot more brutal, but this one, it still has its moments, and it is a story I like quite a bit. This is one dealing with these two, Randolph Scott and Joel McCrea, as aging lawmen, and who they're kind of also wrestling with their place in the world, like a lot of these movies. And they're kind of given this one last chance to go on a mission, on an adventure to transport some gold and protect it across the plains. But along the way, they get caught up in all kinds of misadventures, including saving a woman who she gets herself caught up in this potential marriage situation that doesn't end up the smoothest or the most honorable, and kind of how they have to kind of deal with their kind of own morals about the situation on whether or not they should get involved in something that may or may not concern them, and their different philosophies on this. It's a very compelling movie. I really like Sam Peckinpah's direction for this one. This one doesn't really feel as like enshrouded by the Hays Code as like certain movies from this era. I think this is probably slightly after with what they were able to get away with, but either way, it's a very compelling Western. It is one of among my favorites that I watched out of this batch that I'm talking about today. And Randolph Scott, I'm becoming a bigger and bigger fan of his, so I'm glad that Warner Archive released this one. This one's a little, I think this is the oldest title I'm talking about, but it's a great one, even with like a few years under its belt. It comes from a 2K scan of the interpositive, and this has a good number of special features. It has an audio commentary from film historian Nick Redman, who from Twilight Time, who sadly has passed away and since this has been recorded. And there's also a 23-minute featurette on the making of this movie, which is also pretty entertaining. So porting over the legacy special features and giving it a nice audiovisual presentation, Ride the High Country is really recommended if you're a Western fan. Moving forward to another progressive movie, this is The Mortal Storm with Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan. This was the last of their several collaborations with one another, and it's one that I really admire because this is one of the first films that Hollywood released that really tackled the rise of the Nazis in Germany, and kind of it even went so far as to having all the MGM films banned in Germany because Joseph Goebbels saw the movie and just like objected to it so strongly that he just kind of banned all MGM movies, which is, if you're going to make a stand, that's a good one to make. So yeah, this is set in Germany, and it's kind of just like during that period where Hitler is just coming into power. So it just focuses on one German family and how the rise, it's a Jewish family, the rise in Hitler kind of puts their life in a disarray, to say the least. It is once again a tragic movie, but it's also very impactful, especially with these actors attached to it. With Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan, they are great. There's an array of great ensemble players that really add to this, and it's just a very compelling movie where people are wrestling with their morals. They are getting caught up in kind of the fervor of the time where there's this rise in power, and whether or not you should go along with this power or stand up against it. What are you willing to sacrifice in order to do what is right? These are the questions that we're left with, and it is always really, really well done. So The Mortal Storm is an excellent movie, and I highly recommend it. This one comes from a 4K scan of the best surviving elements. It does include both a live-action short film and a award-winning cartoon. And this is actually directed by one of my favorite directors from old Hollywood. This is one from Frank Borzage, who I've covered a lot of his movies from Kino Classics, and I will pretty much seek him out anywhere I can. So Mortal Storm, it's a good one, so definitely check this out, especially if you're a Jimmy Stewart fan. I'll always have a place for Margaret Sullivan as well, so there's no losing for me. My second to last title comes from I believe this is Michael Curtiz, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Michael Curtiz. This is Young Man with the Horn with Kirk Douglas and Lauren Bacall and Doris Day. And so this, yes, Michael Curtiz, he directed in pretty much every genre you could think of. He's probably best known for Casablanca, but he's a very prolific director, and I've covered many of his movies on geekvibesnation.com. So I can link to him in the episode description. But Young Man with the Horn is an interesting one in his career because it's one of like the earliest examples of a musical biopic. It stars Kirk Douglas as the titular young man with the horn. It is shown from him being a little boy who's he's an orphan. He's kind of trying to figure out his life on the streets. He gets taken in by this musician who recognizes his talents with the horn, and he kind of like teaches him how to develop it, his raw natural talent, into basically one of the best horn players out there. But once again, I'm talking about a lot of tragic tales. It is kind of a rough watch as you see him grow into an adult and kind of struggle with his own brilliance and wanting to top himself, eventually leading him down to a road of alcoholism and just kind of alienating people around him. You have the great Doris Day trying to anchor him in something good and like something worth kind of fighting for. And then Lauren Bacall, she kind of plays her. She's not a femme fatale in the classic sense, but she's kind of someone who almost is kind of the dark to Doris Day's light, even though she's also like a complex character in her own right. But she, like, I guess it's the blondes versus the brunettes, like who's good and bad, but that's kind of reductive. But everyone does a really great job. Kirk Douglas, especially in the lead role. There's a lot of twists and turns in this that are kind of like hit you right in the heart. But overall, it's a very good movie. And if you like movies about musicians, this is a really good one. If you like any of these performers, I recommend it. This comes from a 4K scan of the nitrate elements. This also includes 3 restored cartoons and the trailer, and also a radio show that kind of depicts like a shorter form version of this tale that runs about an hour. So Young Man with the Horn, it's a good one. Pick it up if you're a fan of anyone involved. My final title is kind of an outlier in this episode, but I wanted to just kind of bring something a little bit more whimsical to this discussion. This is 2 original television films from Gene Roddenberry, and this is Genesis 2 and Planet Earth. So 2 films running about an hour and 15 minutes each. Each kind of dealing with the same character and kind of similar premises, but these are just 2 TV movies that were never translated into a proper television series like he got with like Star Trek and other popular shows. But each deal with a man waking up in the distant future into an unfamiliar society. So in Genesis 2, he's kind of our character, he wakes up in a society where everything seems okay at first, where all these scientists that have once lived in this society, they're still around, like they're descendants, but things are a little bit off, and you kind of start to realize as he kind of goes along his adventure what is exactly happening and transpiring, and like what the actual social forces are at play. This one is a little bit more rickety and more like DIY a little bit. The main performer, he is not a bigger name like the one I'll say in Planet Earth, but he does a really good job, and I think this is a really interesting premise that was kind of more finesse that we would get in Planet Earth with John Saxon, who is a great actor who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But Planet Earth is the same, where he kind of wakes up in the distant future, but he kind of wakes up in a society that's kind of more clearly defined as like a matriarchal society, where he's trying to figure out how he can make his own existence work in a society where all the men are kind of under the women's thumb. But I'm mostly okay with how things play out. There were some things I didn't like, how they kind of reduce certain issues to things that no longer hit as well or as well as I think that they would want it to back when it was made in the 70s. But overall, I do quite like both of these television movies. They could have led to maybe like an interesting short-lived series, but it wasn't to be in the cards. But Warner Archive has restored these from the best elements available, and they look pretty much pristine. The best you could hope for these television movies to look, and they sound great. like I said, look amazing. No special features. This is one of the few releases that has like 0 special features. But you do have 2 films, so 2 films for the price of 1. I think it's a good deal. So pretty nice eclectic selection from the Warner Archives as I'm exploring some of the new and old of their offers, and I'm going to keep doing this. So if there's a specific title you want me to cover, make sure to leave that in the comments. I'm down for anything and everything in the Warner Archive because they always put the utmost care in their preservation efforts, and what they are one of the most consistent labels out there. So be sure to subscribe to the Geek Vibes Nation YouTube channel so you keep seeing our videos such as these and our normal Video Attic episodes where we talk about weekly new releases. It's a longer form show, but it's a lot of great banter between me and my co-host. So yeah, like, subscribe, comment, share this with anyone you think would like it, and just make sure to keep supporting the Warner Archive because they are one of the best in the business. But I will be back again probably next month, but until next time, enjoy these movies.